Hi, I'm Linda. I'm amazed when I consider the number of times I could have died or been seriously damaged. I believe that I am protected to a reasonable degree, not just from other people's stupidity, but also my own. Here I relate 7 instances that demonstrate my point. For a while I dated a man who was into several activities, including windsurfing. One day we went out on a lake just south of Oroville, California. My boyfriend at the time was out across the lake on his windsurfer while I was in an area where the wind had died, so I just sat on my board with the sail lying in the water. In the distance I could see a speeding motorboat coming straight toward me. As it got closer, I started to wonder if the driver saw me. The boat kept getting closer. Did they really not see me? By the time I realized the driver did not see me, I couldn't do much about it. I slid into the water just as the boat drove over my sail and ripped a big hole in it. The driver knew he had hit something and circled around back to check. While clutching a half-empty beer bottle, he stopped his boat by me. With slurred speech, he asked if I was okay and was very apologetic. By that time, my boyfriend was heading back toward me. The boat guy's friend in another speedboat also showed up. Apparently, the 2 boats had been racing. My boyfriend and the guy in the second boat proceeded to get into a heated argument with threats about calling the police, while me and the drunk guy watched. I realized that the drunk guy probably really did not see me on the lake due to the sun's angle and reflection on the calm lake. No one was actually hurt, so the drunk guy offered to pay for the sail, and it was settled. It could have been life-changing, but it wasn't for me. I could only hope the drunk guy would realize he shouldn't be racing a boat while intoxicated. Funny thing was, I felt like that particular instance was a cosmic play where I was not actually the star, but more of a supporting cast player for something the boat guys needed to learn. Another instance came one day when I was driving in the fast lane of the 6-lane bypass highway around Sacramento, when I noticed I was behind some idiots with a mattress tied to the top of their car. I could see the mattress was shimmying when it suddenly broke free of the car and landed on edge, upright, facing me in the lane ahead. I could have driven straight into it or tried to swerve going at least 60 miles per hour. Instead, I just held tight to the steering wheel and continued straight on, barely even slowing down. To my amazement, it was like something invisible grabbed hold of the mattress and rolled it like a cartwheel off onto the median. I was just stunned for the rest of the drive home. I'm not sure the idiots even noticed their mattress was gone, as they just kept on going. The next instance was when my husband was alive, and we lived in Suffolk, England, for a few years. Though he usually drove us, I was driving that day. We were traveling on a narrow 2-lane road heading north, probably going at least 50 miles per hour. There was a lot of traffic heading south when I noticed a car heading south in my lane trying to pass a long line of cars. The roadside had no verge and was lined with large trees. Leaving the pavement would have resulted in the car going out of control, and I could see that if the passing car did not move back into the southbound lane, that there would be either a head-on collision with us that would affect several other cars, or we would end up wrapped around a tree. No one in the southbound lane made space for the passing car that was racing to pass around 10 vehicles at the same time. I wondered if that was how we would end. I just held tight to the steering wheel and got over as far as I could and still stay on the road because a tree was right up against the tarmac, and I was heading straight for it. Amazingly, it seemed the laws of physics warped for a moment, just long enough for the passing car to drive down the line in the middle of the road, in between us and the southbound cars. The driver looked like a little old lady with a huge grin on her face. She may have been trying to commit suicide while having some fun in the process. And I could see in the rearview mirror that she was still passing more cars. I'm glad I did not overreact and try any sudden aversion moves, which surely would have resulted in an accident for us, at the very least. When I was in my early 20s, I was following the Guru Maharaji. He was a child at the time, but spoke like a wise old man, and was most interesting to listen to. I was in with a group of his followers, and we would drive all over the country to see him at various venues. We all lived in Lincoln, Nebraska, which was relatively central to get to many locations around the states. One time there was 4 of us who were traveling to Orlando, Florida, to see the Guru and meet up with other devotees. I was driving my '68 VW Beetle, and with the 3 other passengers in the car, the weight limit was at maximum and made it noticeably slower to get up long hills. Going down a hill, it gathered a lot of momentum that made it easier to get up the next hill. We found ourselves going down a very long hill that started out to be fun. Part of the way down, I noticed an articulated truck coming from the opposite direction, making a very slow turn from a turn lane across my lane to get into a parking lot. I hit the brake pedal. Turned out the weight in my car made a big difference to the brakes. Though technically the brakes were fine, the car did not slow down. I pulled on the handbrake, which had no effect. There was also a long line of cars coming my direction in the opposite lane. I quickly realized there was no way I could stop or even slow down as I headed toward the broadside of the trailer. Amazingly, all the cars coming at me could see I was in trouble, and they all moved onto the shoulder. It created just enough of a gap between the truck and the cars for us to pass between. We were all very grateful to be able to continue our journey unscathed. And I learned to take into consideration how the weight affected my brakes. The Guru gathering was great, and we also visited Disney World. During a 6-month period of unemployment, after I moved to California, I found a cabin in a row of 4, nicknamed Welfare Flats, because no one there had a job. It was right between the highway and a river, and 15 miles to the nearest town. I had a cabin on the far end of the cul-de-sac. There I came to know Edwina, the little old lady next door to me, who was rather interesting. She was at war with the cabin on the other side of her. Apparently, she had tried to help them because they had small children, but because drugs were involved, she turned against them. We all had to drive by them to our own cabins. Edwina liked to spin her tires and spray gravel when she passed them. They retaliated by digging a trench in the road to force her to slow down. She moaned about it frequently. I just drove around the trench off to the side. The drug house placed some wood beams on the sides to prevent that. I just slowed down when I went by, but Edwina bitched more loudly, saying what the drug house was doing would hurt our cars. She succeeded in winding me up, so one time while I was going home with my dog in the car, I stopped at the trench and put a beam through my rolled down window in the rear of my car and proceeded to back up rapidly so I could dispose of it. The beam had been sticking well out of my rear window and hit a tree while I backed up. The beam broke in half. I heard a loud bang and found my passenger door window completely shattered. There was glass sprayed throughout my entire car, but none of it hit me or my dog. I continued to back up to where I could park and assess the damage. I would need a new window, but that was all. The lesson I learned was not to let anyone make me their pawn again. I also did something even more stupid while I lived there. There was a campground only a mile from where I lived that had a tiny shop and a post office where I would collect my mail. One day I was returning home after collecting my mail. As usual, I had my dog with me. It was a sunny summer day and almost no traffic. Please note that the highway was cut along the side of the mountain next to the river, and it was pretty much straight down the steep embankment. There were only a few places where trees grew on the slope, and the road was very bendy. My mouth was dry, so I decided to reach into my purse on the passenger side floor and rummage for a candy roll. I only looked at my purse for a second. When my eyes returned to the road, I was headed for a roadside marker, so I swerved to avoid it and lost control of the car. I swerved a couple more times, which caused the car to spin 180 degrees around and slid down the sideways off the road down the embankment 20 feet. It was all in slow motion to me. Fortunately, I found myself in a small cluster of trees at a 75 degrees angle. Just a few yards farther down the road, and I would have ended up in the river. Of course, my adrenaline was pumping, and I couldn't think straight. In fact, it was the best adrenaline rush in my entire life. My car was resting on two frees on the front and rear side panels. The windows were open, so my dog climbed out over me. I don't quite remember how I got out, but I made it up to the road without even a scratch. Luckily, there had been a car behind me that saw what happened and came to my assistance. And there was no need for an ambulance. The guy from the car behind me got hold of the police, and soon enough, a tow truck arrived. Amazingly, the truck towed my car back up to the road, and it was still drivable. The $2,000 worth of damage was mostly cosmetic, and insurance covered it. The whole time I was by the side of the road, I had a vision of a TV presenter interviewing me about what stupidity does. I told people I was trying to get a bee out of my car when I crashed. I would mention that my tires were low, which contributed to going out of control. For a while, I dated a man I will refer to as RB. He drove us to the Cragside estate in Northumberland, England, where the first hydroelectric system was designed and installed for the huge Armstrong house, which was much like a museum. There were gates through the center of the house to the carriage track, a narrow road 6 miles long that went all around the estate. That closed at 5 o'clock. We made it through the gates at 4:50 p.m. RB wasn't sure about it, as we could see it was a bit narrow at the beginning of the track. But I was enthusiastic about it, so we proceeded heading up it. It was absolutely one way, and you could really only travel at 15 miles per hour max. A short ways along, we found ourselves behind a small car and just followed them. It was extremely windy bendy, along with being very narrow. RB was paying very close attention to his driving, while I navigated with the tiny tourist map you get when you enter the estate. About a mile or so down the road, if you could call it that, we came to the narrowest part of the road where there was a rock face on the left that was straight up and down up against the tarmac, and a wood guardrail on the right to prevent people from going down the steep embankment, which was only inches from the tarmac. I swear we were only going 15 miles per hour at the most, and I think less than that. He was paying attention while I navigated. Then bang! Somehow we hit a rock on the left. Suddenly the car went crazy, shuddering and shaking while it loudly hit the rock face a couple more times, then sent the car off toward the guardrail on the right. The car was out of control at that point, freaking out and making nasty noises. I was saying, "What's going on?" Then the car hit the guardrail, taking out a main post along with a few yards of cross members, held together by strips of metal and bolts. We found ourselves at an angle with the car partially on the tarmac and partially dangling over the edge, very much like the bus at the end of the Italian Job. And it was pretty much straight down from there. The car was stopped, so I got out. I was perfectly okay, not even a scratch. RB doesn't remember opening the car door on his side. There was nothing to step out onto. He managed to crawl out the passenger side on his hands and knees. He got up and was quite shaken, wondering what had happened. But he was okay. Fortunately, the car ahead of us saw we were in distress and stopped. A nice lady in her 30s got out, and then her grandmother, who was visiting from Poland, got out. They came down to see what had happened. It was clear the car was not going anywhere and was thoroughly blocking the road, with no way to get past unless you were on a cycle of some kind or walking. Shortly, another large black Land Rover came up behind us. I went over to the driver's window and let him know he wasn't getting past. He said he could see that with a big grin on his face, and proceeded to back down the track, which would have been most tricky. I'm sure he and his family were excited to make it through the gates just before they closed. Turned out that wasn't so lucky for them. The lady in the car ahead of us kindly offered to get us back to the visitor center. It was way after hours on that Sunday evening by the time we got help. We were fortunate that the car had gotten high-centered on a large rock, which prevented us from going down the steep embankment, another 30 yards. The car was totaled, and we were an hour and a half from home. But we got it towed, which was an all-night process, and taken home just as the sun was coming up, just a mere 20 hours after the date began. In my senior dating videos, I have the details of this date and call it my Italian Job date, because we ended up dangling half off the tarmac like the end of that movie. RB and I broke up not long after that, but it was a very memorable date. All of this does not mean that I feel I'm invulnerable. When I was a child, I broke my clavicle wrestling with my sister and broke it again tripping over a sidewalk. I broke my foot jumping over a fence and again jumping over a sprinkler. I also had a dirt bike motorcycle accident where I was going down a steep hill without my helmet. And the last thing I remember was going over the handlebars. I woke up in the ambulance and ended up with 6 stitches on my head. This was all before I was 18. And I managed to bugger my left knee when it went backwards while loading a couch into a van 8 years ago. My knee still bothers me periodically and is not dependable, so I don't risk trying to run. But other than that, I'm still in reasonable condition for being almost 70 years old. When I eventually felt a sense of being protected to some degree, it made me bolder to try new things and take more chances. I also tried to not be stupid about it. I have a sense that the metaphysical law of attraction may have some validity. If you think about nasty things happening to you, then you may draw that experience to yourself. We all have nasty thoughts, but I tell the universe that I don't need that experience and change my mind to focus on something positive. And when I do get into a negative situation that I caused, I admit my mistake and ask the universe to allow me to pass through the door of lesser consequences. So far, it has worked every time once I learned to do that. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe.